Hello, everyone. It's Professor Hamamoto. It is December 8th, year 2024. The time is 4 o'clock p.m. Nice to have you here in the chat. Got some really interesting videos for you here that might not make it into the final cut because of copyright violations, but I'll just plunge ahead because there's a lot of visual material here that flesh out a part of the history of not just Las Vegas, Nevada, but of the United States of America, involving figures, movers and shakers, far beyond what we know about through Hollywood films, which has been the the topic for the last, I guess it's a couple weeks now. And by the way, I'm not going to announce the guest's name today, but for next week, I'm pretty sure I have him for a live cast. He's a person who's written extensively on at Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. And of course, I'm going to approach it with my own particular angle of vision, just like I will today. And no, the person who built Las Vegas is not Elvis Aaron Presley, although he had a really big hand in it, as we'll see in a moment. But I'm speaking more specifically, as I put in the description, this very skillful, this clever investor, some call him a corporate raider, a takeover artist, right? He dealt with, by the way, some of the best takeover artists of the day, including Michael Milken. Michael Milken, he went away for a while. He went to prison because of certain irregularities in his profession. But somehow Kirk Kerkorian managed to evade any sort of, there were whispers and there were hints, but unlike most of the people that he replaced, he never saw any prison time. And one of the big questions that I hope to ask today is why? Why him? And of course, that type of information is going to help us in our current struggles with bringing these miscreants who are running free, who obviously committed crimes of a heinous nature, right? So for today's talk, I'm going to be dealing with a book. It's published 2018. It's still very new. It's called The Gambler by William C. Rempel. I have the link down below. You'll want to get it because I can't really do it justice. Some of the stories are, if you're just in it for the sheer entertainment, you will not be disappointed. But of course, I'm looking through this book, attempting to understand how the real political system operates through people like Kirk Kerkorian, who arrived in this country. Well, I actually was born in Fresno, California, and he was living in a very tight Armenian immigrant, or maybe they're a refugee family in the Central Valley. I don't know if you know this, but the Fresno area is the agricultural heartland of California. It supplies a lot of the agriculture for most of the United States and around the world. And there are a lot of Armenians that settled the area. And before that, there are lots of Chinese immigrants from the southern parts of China, the Pearl River Delta area, who were experienced for generations in that kind of farming, irrigation farming, who were in the area. And then, of course, that they were barred from immigration by the California, by the federal government, by the U.S. Congress. So to replace them, they allowed the Japanese immigrants in. These are my people. And they let them flourish in the agricultural trade in the Fresno area. I still have relatives who live in the area. They managed to buy back some of their grape land or some of their agricultural land, but their progress was severely stunted, to put it lightly, by these pieces of legislation targeting them by race, right? And if you're Sicilian or Italian or German, please don't tell me, oh yeah, my people were put in concentration camps too. Yeah, some of you were, some foreign nationals were, but not in such a large, comprehensive system, right? Because I know a lot of people are kind of fed up talking about race, but that discussion is not ended just because Donald Trump got into office. Moreover, I'm bringing that into this discussion to demonstrate the material hazards to certain groups by targeting them on the basis of race and then providing advantage to others. And I'm not blaming Armenians as such. They took opportunities that were there. So they were able to get a lot of property, farming property, for pennies on the dollar. And some of them moved to the city, like the Krikorian family. He was the youngest of 4 children, and he didn't speak English until he was about 7 years old. And he wanted to be one of the wealthiest men in America. How does that happen? Well, the subtitle here is How a Penniless Dropout, Kirk Kerkorian Became the Greatest Steelmaker in Capitalist History, as if it was because of his unique genius and a combination of luck, because he was a heavy gambler. But there were more forces in his favor that are not covered in this book. And that's what I want to spend a good deal of time on here, the omissions of the story. Aside from that, the book is excellent. Just getting the details of his life history and stories that involve many celebrities of the era. Some young people might, strangely enough, tragically enough, don't know who Frank Sinatra is. Some people barely can feel Elvis Presley, right? But these are all really important figures of that time and into the future, into the present day, which I hope to explain. So while this book is excellent on most, so far as a research rigor, and he's got incredible bibliography here. He's done his research, William Rempel. There's no index, so I had to do that myself. I have these little stick-em notes that I write little key phrases so I can access them. I'm not going to be able to really hew very closely to the book. I'll let you do that. So I have a number of related agenda items that I want to get through today. And it also has relevance to one casino king, a magnate, a hotelier that is near and dear to many of us here watching this show, Donald John Trump. Right? You've heard of Trump Tower. Of course, he has a presence in Las Vegas. His holdings are all over the country. I think they're mostly, though, in back east. So he makes appearance, but not too heavily. So this book is quite relevant in understanding the present day. And I'll also be talking about another group, in addition to Armenians, who have been quite successful through not always straightforward means. I'm talking about criminality. All right. And I haven't been able to find much material on Kerkorian. That's up for you to do. And I'm going to be keeping my eyes peeled. I'm sure there's information out there. A future biographer is going to do a honest and critical biography of Kirk Kerkorian. And I think it's going to yield his close connection to the intelligence agencies of the United States of America and of Britain. Excuse me a second. Right, let's take a look at Mr. Kerkorian.
Kerkorian, a name synonymous with the glitz and glamour of Las Vegas, is one of the founding fathers of the modern Sin City we know today. His vision and tenacity transformed the Strip into a world-renowned destination, with the majority of his legacy still operated by MGM Resorts International. Born on June 6, 1917, in the sun-kissed state of California, Kerkorian's journey to success was not a straight path. From his early days as a boxer to his ventures into the aviation and film industries, Kerkorian was a man of many talents. But it was the allure of the casino business that ultimately captured his entrepreneurial spirit. After serving in World War II, Kerkorian, with his hard-earned savings, purchased a Cessna. This marked the beginning of his love affair with Las Vegas, a city he first visited in 1944. His initial involvement with the city was running a small air charter service, Trans International Airlines, transporting gamblers from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. This venture proved to be a stepping stone towards his future empire. Kerkorian's first major investment in Las Vegas came in 1962, when he bought 80 acres of land across the Las Vegas Strip from the Flamingo. This purchase led to the construction of Caesar's Palace, which not only made Kerkorian a hefty profit, but also set the stage for his future endeavors. In 1967, Kerkorian, with architect Martin Stern Jr., built the International Hotel on Paradise Road, which at the time was the largest hotel in the world. The hotel attracted big names like Barbra Streisand and Elvis Presley, who brought in record-breaking crowds.
We're going to get into Elvis pretty soon, so just hold on. We'll get to the king, right? And I encourage you to study Elvis's music independently of me, right? The music of the late 60s and 70s, I have to be honest and say it really didn't move me, because by then he was a corporate phenomenon. He wasn't the Elvis of the Sun Records years, where he was discovered by a local entrepreneur, a radio man called Sam Phillips. Most of you know the story. I visited the studio. It's still there. If you're ever in Memphis, definitely go visit Sun Studios. And it's still active, I believe. The original equipment has been moved out and they use digital recording techniques, but it left its imprint, indelible imprint on American music and the popular culture. That's Elvis, right? So I admit I tend to prefer the Sun Records. The more rockabilly, the more hillbilly, the more country, the more gospel Elvis before he started to become sort of Hollywood homogenized. Some people prefer that. It's up to you. So that's the International Hotel. It's not, it doesn't go by that name today. It's changed hands a few times. I can't remember offhand what it's called today, but it's still there. You can book a room, and they have all kinds of exhibits. Check on YouTube. There's all these different podcasters who do these shows on Las Vegas. I watch a lot of them. And as you know, I'm interested in casino culture anyway. I was just at a casino this weekend because I like to go there to get a feel for what the economy is like. I can kind of feel the pulse of the public by soaking up the vibrations in the casino floor. And contrary to what people say, it's not a recession-proof industry. When people are hurting for money, they tend to pull back. When they're feeling this, what they call irrational exuberance, they tend to say, well, I can afford to lose some money on a bet. So they'll be at the casinos, right? And of course, within that, the primary clientele there are yellow people, right? I've told you about the irony of going to an Indian casino to find yellow people all in one place because they like to gamble and they tend to save their money. They like to roll the dice, so to speak. And I was reading the first volume of Sean Atwood's. Some of you are quite familiar with his excellent work. I was reading the first volume of his autobiography. It's excellent, by the way. Pick that one up and read it. It's incredible. But he first started making commissions he worked in a boiler room just to generate his own leads. And he just got a telephone book and started looking for Asian names. Chan, Ching. If it sounded Asian, he was cold calling them. And that's when he started building up the commissions. All right. So it makes you wonder why the mainstream media and the university in particular want to keep us kind of a hidden resource. And I think I know the reason, because they want to milk us dry as best as they can and exploit our genius and our risk-taking behavior and our money and our high income, relatively speaking to other groups, high income and education levels. This time around, they're not going to be able to put us in the concentration camps or put these restrictive barriers and say, no more Chinese in America. That'd be too obvious. So they have their other ways of doing that, but that's another talk. And it's a theme that I keep returning to over and over again, right? And Kirk Kerkorian sold out his interests in Las Vegas because he had no sentimental attachment to anything he bought. Airlines, automobiles, airplanes, homes, businesses, large and small. If he felt the timing was right and he was going to turn a decent profit, he was out and he was on to the next deal. He keeps churning the action. And that's a recurrent theme. That's why this book is titled Gambler. He wasn't really gambling. If he was gambling, he was gambling with not his own money, but with OPM, other people's money, right? Including bankers from the City of London, right? He was on the verge of making a deal, really high interest, with Transamerica, which was Bank of America. By the way, Bank of America started out as an ethnic-specific banking establishment that catered to Italian, Sicilian immigrants in the late 19th century, early 20th century. A.J. Giannini and a couple of other people. Why? Because the white shoe banks wouldn't do business with the smelly Italians. Boy, were they stupid. So I'm telling you, by keeping people out of the game, you're just hurting yourself. And look at Transamerica now. It's one of the largest financial institutions in the world. And its Italian origins are now obscured. But I'm reminding you of this. It was this immigrant generation who had to get over somehow in a society that was not made for them. I mean, there was a lot of talk when Armenians were migrating or immigrating to the U.S. to say, hey, they're Orientals like me, like yellows, right? So they can't come into the country. We have an Oriental Exclusion Act, 1988, 2024. But they won court cases saying we are not Oriental, we are actually Caucasian. And that seminal difference allowed people like Kirk Kerkorian to become a multi-billionaire, and people like my father is just sort of a wannabe. Believe me, he was a hustler. He had big dreams. I probably learned about Kirk Kerkorian through my dad because he would read all the finance papers. He knew who owned what deals were being made, and he also knew the sports scores. The Dodgers and the Rams, USC, UCLA. We were in Los Angeles, right? Which is the capital of Armenian America. It's the largest concentration of Armenians outside of Armenia itself. And I remember back then it was under the Soviet bloc. And I'm telling you, this is one of the reasons I think that Kirk Kerkorian was used as a conduit to get money into Soviet Armenia under the guise of being a benevolent contributing member of the Armenian diaspora, which is all well and good, right? It's great that he kept it Armenian, right? He kept it straight. Most of his right-hand men, not women, men, because we're talking about gamblers and people who live really hard. They like to drink and party and go yachting, right? And women, truthfully, were more like accessories to male success. And he had a share of those. He had the young blondes. He never married an Armenian woman. He didn't want like a dark-haired beauty. He wanted a blonde shiksa, right? That was his trophy. I mean, that doesn't say in the book there, but I know the type. I see this. I see it amongst yellow people too. It's their trophy. I made it. This is what I'm banging. Okay. So let's see some of the other deals that Kerkorian was involved. This is from the home institution of William Rampell, the Los Angeles Times. And I mention that because, as you know, most of you know at least, The LA Times was really the major paper in LA from the 30s, 40s, and 50s to the present day, which was always running interference for the Hollywood film industry. They covered all kinds of, I covered that last week, right? And the week before that, we talked about Fred Otash and all the spying and all the bugging and eavesdropping. And by the way, I'm finishing up this book. So you want to subscribe while it's on your mind so that you'll get a notification. This one's called Bombshell. It's fairly new. I think it's 1 year old, maybe. The subtitle is The Night Bobby Kennedy Killed Marilyn Monroe. Very provocative title, wouldn't you say? But this is the milieu out of which Kirk Kerkorian emerged. This is the milieu other prominent Armenian Americans came out of, including the Kardashian women's. Robert Kardashian. He's from LA. His father and I think his brothers were partners. They tend to do family-centered businesses because if you can't trust your family, who can you trust? And they still have problems, inter-family squabbles, like Kerkorian did. Toward the end of his life, his family, where they were just fighting tooth and nails for his billions of dollars. But I'll get to that in a moment. But Robert Kardashian was a LA guy. He was upper middle class. His father and I think his grandfather owned, I think it was called United Meats, if I'm not mistaken. You can look that up on your own. And he didn't want to enter the family business because it's really, he's living in LA. He's a rich kid. I think he went to UCLA or something. I don't know what it is, but he wasn't feeling being in the meat trade. And by the way, I used to go with to United Meats, all the wholesale meat places with my dad, who I told you was a hustler. He was an entrepreneur. He would buy full pigs, not hogs, pigs. And he had a nursery that he bought from Mickey Cohen. That's a name you should know. So far as our social history. So he had a lot of room in his nursery, and he would dig these kalua, which is Hawaiian cooking, underground cooking. If you've ever been to Hawaii, they have these luau's, and they do not real, it's not the real thing, but my dad used to do the real kalua or luau, because these are all Japanese from Hawaii, Nisei, who wanted some soul food. They wanted some food from the islands. So I would go to United Meats, places like that. My dad would throw a big giant, probably weighed 500 pounds pig in the back of his truck because he had that kind of wheels. He was going to all the different homes of the celebrities and directors and actors, landscaping their homes out in Bel Air, Beverly Hills, all the rich areas that otherwise I never would have known existed. I got a behind the scenes glimpse of that world. You can't get in there if you're just coming off the street. You'll be arrested. In fact, my dad was picked up while walking in Beverly Hills once. He was picked up WWA, Walking While Asian. Because he was from Hawaii. There's lots of yellows there, right? And the segregation system, he wasn't really aware of it in LA yet, but he found out right quick. All right, so here's some of the deals that fabulous Kirk Kerkorian got himself involved with, right? And keep in mind, it is the Los Angeles Times. In spite of that, there's truth that they do put out there, but they're only going to go so far. They're not going to talk about the CIA, which I will, and I'm not accusing Kirk Kerkorian of being involved with the CIA or MIA, but from what I'm inferring in this book, he fits that profile. And also he fits the profile of people who are in air transport, who we know definitively today were involved in illegal traffic of all sorts, including drugs. You've heard of the Civilian Air Transport, CAT. Later, it was called the Flying Tigers. And you know their history in the 50s and 60s through the Vietnam War. It's a civilian airline. This is what Kirk Kerkorian was doing after he got, well, he was a civilian, but he had a commission with the Royal Air Force, right? And he had that because if he was a civilian, if the plane went down, he would have been executed as a spy. But if he had the uniform and the papers, according to the Geneva Code Convention, they couldn't kill him. It was still a risky proposition. But technically, he was a civilian. And he ferried these made in America airliners, mostly Douglas, DC-3s, later DC-8s. I can't remember the models. I'm not familiar with planes that much. Kirk Kerkorian was an aviator. He really admired Howard Hughes as a result. So, like some other people after the war, he said, hey, we need transportation, right? And it's post-war. All these GIs are back from there. They're really thankful that they made it home to start families and buy homes and have jobs after being through the Depression, almost get killed in Europe and in Asia. So Las Vegas was one of the preferred choices. They felt they earned it, and they did. I'm not being moralistic here. I'm not opposed to gambling. You know, I don't do it myself. I'm not opposed to drinking, although I don't do it myself. You know, I could be a Mormon. I wouldn't, but and I'll expand on that cryptic reference in a moment when we get to Howard Hughes about the Mormons. He was surrounded by them. They were known as the Mormon Mafia, and there is plenty of literature on them. Because most people, when they talk about Las Vegas, oh yeah, I know all about it. I saw Casino. I saw Goodfellas. I saw Wise Guys. If they think Martin Scorsese is the definitive story of the Italian and Jewish mafia, they were an important part. I'm not going to take it away from them. But you got your Armenians, you got your Mormons. Those are the only two groups I'm going to talk about now. And I have alluded to the fact of Yellows, who are always part of the Las Vegas scene, but not up front. In fact, the biggest casinos now are in Asia. They used to have to come here to the U.S., Las Vegas in specific. And Hawaii has no gambling. So what did Kerkorian do? He had a shuttle service transporting gamblers, and you know they like to gamble. They're Yellows. They fly them from Honolulu to the airport. I don't think McCarran Airport was built yet. It's just kind of a small scale landing strip. He did that because he could see it. He was, first of all, he was shuttling I assume they're gangsters. They were gamblers, right? High income people in entertainment, lawyers, mostly men, singers, actors. He would have the shuttle they would get on in LA, I think out of Glendale Airport. Glendale, by the way, is a city that even today has a very, very high population of Armenian Americans. And the good news is that they're very vocal and politically engaged. And when the LA school district was following these globalist dictates to queer the curriculum and to make boys wear dresses and to tell everybody that they're gender fluid, it was the Armenian American parents, and more Arab parents were also there, but mostly Armenians, said, no, no, no. They went down to the school board and said, we're not having that. Right. We did not come all the way here and do our own Holocaust. 1 million, 1.5 million. The figures are not definitive. This was during the height of the Ottoman Empire, which later collapsed. And you know about the genocide. If you don't, you need to do some background reading. And I say this because I think that history of his family, although his immediate family weren't affected, he again was one of those people who were lumped in racially with a group who was slated for elimination on the basis of their ethnicity and their religion, because they're primarily Christian, Eastern Orthodox. All right, so we can get back to that if I have the time. So let's look at some of the more deals that Kirk Kerkorian was involved with.
Once known as the richest person in Los Angeles, has died. He was 98. Kerkorian built his wealth by buying, building, and selling companies. One of his earliest deals was the purchase of Los Angeles Air Service, which he sold, bought back, and eventually sold to Transamerica in 1968, earning more than $100 million. Kerkorian bought a large stake in Chrysler Corp in the early 1990s and sold it as it recovered. He also did the same with General Motors in 2005 and earned a profit. He had famously bought and sold MGM Studios 3 times. Kerkorian saw the promise of Las Vegas after World War II and eventually acquired many of its most famous properties, including the Bellagio, the Mirage, and the MGM Grand. In the 70s, when he opened the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, it was considered the world's largest resort hotel at the time. His net worth declined over recent years. According to Forbes, Kerkorian's net worth peaked at nearly $18 billion in 2007 and had fallen to about $4 billion in recent estimates. Kerkorian rose from poverty to extreme wealth, powered by little more than energy and guts.
That's Sheldon Adelson, by the way, one of Trump's close friends. And he's a friend. He's friendly to the Clintons. He's friendly to anybody that's going to consider his business holdings with great favor. Adelson and Kerkorian on the left.
He might have called himself lucky, but like most successful entrepreneurs, he made his own way.
There you go. Short and sweet, courtesy of the LA Times. Hopefully they're not going to call me on a strike, but you can find this on YouTube. For some reason you can put it on YouTube, but I can't put it on my shows. But you get the idea. He was a big baller. And he himself, you can tell he's a wiry, strong guy. He was 98 when he died. He kept himself in shape. He played tennis every day. Of course, he had his own court. And he played with all kinds of pros and semi-pros and some of the Hollywood people in his court. And he was even in tournaments. I think in his 80s, he was in a senior competition. He was very, very competitive. He will outwork you. He'll run you around the court. Kirk Kerkorian, what a guy. But he kept it Armenian. One of the waiters that once he moved to Las Vegas and started developing properties there, including the MGM Grand, as you saw alluded to in that previous piece, because he bought MGM Studios. He bought it and sold it a few times. He kept on churning it. So they said, well, let's leverage the MGM name, the brand. This is before branding. And the lion, Leo the Lion, let's build a casino around it. And let's put the exhibits in special areas within the hotel. I mean, he owned the company. I think he owned about 30%, so he could call the shots. He says, we own the Wizard of Oz. We own a lot of, I think, what's the one with Clark Gable and Vivian Leigh? The Civil War epic. I think that was MGM, lots of them. He owned that whole library, and people resonated with it. Right, I think they even had the ruby slippers. They bought it and they exhibited there. Right. And he helped to restore and revive the sinking fortunes of MGM before he said, well, I'm going to turn a profit. I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to move into something else. And he got into that by selling airplanes, selling his airline. So he was always leveraging properties that he already owned to buy something bigger and better. And in every single case, it put him in contact with other movers and shakers. For example, when he first started his shuttle service from LA to Las Vegas, he was dealing with all the casino owners and the wise guys who were headquartered in LA and had to go to Las Vegas conveniently, quickly. And there were no airlines doing, well, there were a couple, but it wasn't like it is today. All right. So he saw a need and he filled it. But in doing so, he got close to a lot of these hoteliers and casino magnates, got a lot of inside information. He was brought in certain deals. So for young people who are watching this cast, if you want to get ahead in the world, make yourself available to be a driver for someone in a position of power and influence. I learned that secret a long time ago by reading these biographies. Daryl Gates, who later became the chief of police in LAPD, he was the driver to William Parker. He heard everything. Right? Whenever they're in my field, in the academic world, if there was some top-notch academic who came in, they had to fly in from San Diego, New York, going to the airport, getting a cab. There was no Uber back then. You'd have to hail a cab. It was just a hassle. And I said, hey, I have a car. Why don't you stand outside the front and I'll pick you up. I'll load your bags and I'll take you to San Francisco International Airport. And every time I got an invitation to visit them at their resort or their research center, every time. I never followed up on it, But I was trying to be a nice guy too. But I learned a lot. They told me all kinds of stuff. That's just a sort of a business hint. You have to be there when the action's taking place, right? Otherwise, history's going to pass you by. And you also have to protect yourself at all times. I don't have to tell you that. Most of you know this. So like I said, he was very proud of his Armenian heritage, as were his older sister and his younger brother. His father couldn't read. He was non-literate. His mother, I think, could read a little bit. They were just really, 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 really poor. And I think he suffered for that because he never liked to do public appearances. He didn't like to speak in public either. Maybe he had a slight accent. I don't know. But it was excruciating for him to do that. And surprisingly, according to this book, Cary Grant suffered from the same affliction. He would rather be shot, in front of a firing squad instead of going up to make a speech in front of people. He didn't, and he's Cary Grant. He can do it in the movies. He can do it for the camera, but he just couldn't do it in a spontaneous fashion. And I noticed a lot of, I've known some actors and performers and so on, comedians and performance people, and they are like that. They're very much like that. They're not, you think they're backslappers and they're hamming it up and all that, but they're very controlled and inward. Maybe because people want to entertain them so much that you say, nah, I don't want to really deal with you. So here's a tribute to the title of this piece is called The Armenian Who Became Filthy Rich. Here it is.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Armenian News Network, the latest about Armenians and Armenian news all over the world in English. He was as strong as a nail, as silent as a mouse, and everyone respected him. This is what former Las Vegas Mayor Oscar Goodman said about American Armenian businessman Kirk Kerkorian. He was happy to go to work on foot to watch a movie like everyone else in the cinema. This was revealed by William Rempel in his book, The Gambler. As you understood today, we will reveal an American businessman, investor, and philanthropist, Kirk Kerkorian, who is of Armenian origin. First a news agent, then a boxer, then a pilot. Life threw him on the battlefield of World War II. Each flight of the Air Force pilot brought $1,000, and so 50 flights later, he had a business idea after World War II, and also earned some money. He started the first flights to bring gamblers from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. As it grew, he took the company public one day and became a wealthy man after. Kirk then started selling planes and opened 4 small airlines himself. He earned $37 million in 5 years. He later built a hotel on the Las Vegas Strip, made it home to Elvis, introduced Barbra Streisand, Ike, and Tina Turner to Vegas through his hotel, and then sold it to the Hilton Group for $140 million the following year. Then the casino businesses started. He is famous within the investment banking industry for forcing casino mogul Steve Wynn out of his own company in the 2000s, making an offer that Wynn's board accepted, but also exiled him as terms of accepting Krikorian's offer. Almost half of the casinos and hotels in Las Vegas at one point were his. The list of his business accolades is expansive, and some juicy stories deserve their own video. He is well known for his artistry and hostile takeovers of businesses. In the 90s, he had started taking more and more shares from the auto company Chrysler. After a lot of interactions with legendary businessman Lee Iacocca and continued stock purchases, his stance from passive investor turned into a hostile bid that ultimately failed after a long and bitter fight. He also attempted to take over General Motors and then pushed for a merger with Japanese automaker Nissan and Renault.
Well, this is when I think Kirk Kerkorian started to go sideways, when he was doing all these attempted hostile takeover of automobile companies. I think in his mind, he thought that would be the pinnacle of being a captain of industry, but he wasn't building anything. He was just raiding, right? They were valued lower than he thought, and he thought he can go in there and, manipulate the buy price and then get a return on his investment to make it all pay off of the attorneys and everybody else. But that's when I think, and that was what he was doing towards the end of his life, right? Which we'll get to in a moment. So you had this guy here from 65 to 70, made all kinds of money in the transportation business. So as I alluded to at the top of this cast, how do you think that happened? Right? He had no capital, really. He was worth maybe $5 million, but you're not going to invest your whole nut into buying a airline or planes. Well, you know the story of the Flying Tigers, the civil air transportation. You've known the stories later on in the American history. The story of Barry Seal, who was making these runs from Mena, Arkansas to Latin America, right? And you know that his clientele from LA, from New York to Las Vegas, in his private aircraft, which aren't inspected, right? You can bring anything you want that you can carry in there. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on Kirk Kerkorian or his pilots or what they were doing, but I'm just looking at and saying that's really easy to bring in a lot of contraband, move it from place to place, in addition to cash money. Remember, this is back in a time when credit cards were almost unheard of. Unless you were a big spender, you might have a diner's card. Right? So there's a lot of wiggle room for these entrepreneurs. And at the same time, people in the intelligence services said, hey, we have all those guys, these Sicilians and Jews who are making all this money in Las Vegas. We're the ones in charge of the American economy. We are the captains of industry. We are the white shoe boys. We are the Episcopalian mafia. What they have built up should be ours. We're going to put them out of business. We're going to this is original lawfare. We're going to put our guys into the Attorney General's office. We're going to start commissions, McClellan Commission, to put these people under the spotlight. And we're going to create this whole negative perception of these wise guys. And I'm not saying they're angels, right? But who are the people that are trying to put them out of business? Are they any better? I don't think so. So Kirk Kerkorian, since he was not obviously mobbed up like all these other owners, they were getting money from, Meyer Lansky. These are names you're familiar with. Sam Giancana, the Central Union Fund, Jimmy Hoffa. You know that story, right? He steered clear of that because his patrons were in the city of London and Wall Street and San Francisco. That's the West Coast Wall Street. That's where he got his financing. And that's legit capital. That's capitalism. And that, of course, not coincidentally, is when Las Vegas turned to from being a mob owned and operated playground to a corporate owned and operated fleece joint. They're called carpet joints in the mafia days. That's why you see these movies talking about events that are over by 30, 40, 50 years, right? It's more mythology that we're seeing thanks to one of the preferred filmmakers of the establishment, the Wall Street boys, Martin Scorsese. By the way, one of his first movies was called Italian American. I've seen it. I've studied Martin Scorsese, his films. He went to film school at NYU. Yeah, it's just a short film about his mother and father and life living in Little Italy in New York. Right. So if Martin Scorsese and his preferred actors, like that ass clown, what's his name? Robert De Niro, and some of these other characters, if their lives and their social milieu is worth recording, documenting, and putting on film, memorializing and writing histories, then certainly the history of yellow people is worthwhile doing the same. So you got some business people out there who are missing the boat. Hit me up. Talk to me. I sent a message and a $10 donation to the Michael Francis channel, one of my favorite channels, because he's a stand-up guy. He was a mob guy. I like author. He's written a book called Mafia Democracy. You should pick that one up. I like people who are not pop-up pundits and repeaters from reading books. I like people who have lived it, and they're writing about their lives, really, when they're doing this type of work. So I gave him $10. I said, hey, Mr. Francis, could you give a shout out to my Asian brothers in Chinatown, New York? I said, the Chinese, the Orientals, the Asians. He said, we work very well with the Sicilians and the Jews, but we don't get any credit for it. Who do you think was supplying all the heroin, all the cocaine before it started coming from Mexico? And it's still coming from Asia, right? By the way, I talk about one such drug dealer in my own book. Her name was Margaret Chung, Servitors of Empire, Studies in the Dark Side of Asian America. This is the type of history that we're not getting at the university or at the K through 12 curriculum. And I made it my special mission to put that out there. Margaret Chung was a medical doctor. She did abortions, which was illegal back then, mostly for celebrities and Hollywood types. I think she was out in San Francisco. And she also was a close associate of Virginia Hill. Look that one up. She was Bugsy Siegel's gun moll, who was skimming a lot of money. And you know what happened to Bugsy Siegel? He took a couple bullets in the head, and they give her a ticket to get out of town. That's Virginia Hill. Well, she was running with Mama Chung, who was close to one of these airlines, the Flying Tigers. What do you think the Flying Tiger? How do you think they supported themselves? If they couldn't get congressional appropriations, they were running dope. That was Mama Chung. So when I say that the yellow people are integral to this history, I'm not playing Wish Upon a Star. And my greatest hope is to return to Las Vegas one day and go to the Mob Museum. I encourage you to go there. When next time you're in Las Vegas, it's not, you have to take a cab or an Uber or whatever to get over there. Or if you have your own car, you have to drive it. It's not a walking distance. It's called the Mob Museum, but there's nothing on the Asian criminals. It's the usual suspects. So I have to talk to the curator there and say, listen, I want to put together something here for an exhibit, right? Do you think the China, that is now the number one economy in the world, do you think they got there by just outcompeting Americans intellectually or labor, cheap labor, whatever it might be? No. There's a lot of money that had to change hands for China to be allowed to go to the top. And we have an outgoing president, as you well know, and his brother, who are very much involved in these transactions. So Kirk Kerkorian and his fellow Armenians were able to rise through society while we sat it out World War II in one of 10 concentration camps across the western United States, thanks to the U.S. Congress and the state of California. Here we go.
Armenians. While this article may have gone unnoticed by many readers at the time, the implications of this case were momentous. A few months later, Congress actually reinforced Lowell's decision by exempting Armenians, along with Assyrians and Jews, from the prevailing rule that Asiatics were ineligible for naturalization. That is to say that a few years earlier, before Kartosian's case, they had already gone through this process and said, you know what, they're not going to count as Asian. We're going to say the Jews and the Assyrians and the Armenians, they count as white. We're putting them over here. And the founding fathers didn't tell us how to interpret that phrase, but that was the phrase that we were left with. Now, the malleability and instability of...
Okay, you get the idea, which I made earlier. Syrians, Middle Eastern people, Jews were reclassified as Caucasian or quote-unquote white, where we, the yellows, were left on the other side of the color line, along with the Mexicans and the blacks. And that's how I grew up. We used to have Jewish neighbors, but once those restrictions came down, they were allowed to move anywhere in LA. So they left us behind. So I grew up under segregation, as I tell you over and over again. And not only that, they stole our capital that we've been building for decades. And they also did not allow the immigrants to become U.S. citizens. No voting rights. Right. Kirk Kerkorian and his family could get citizenship, voting rights, and he would be treated seriously with political figures because he had political juice. Not so with the yellows. And this doesn't include the crazy rich Asians you see running around with conspicuous consumption. Right. It doesn't include them. They're oblivious to this history. A lot of them were coming in, they were becoming my students. But they really, I don't know if they felt it or not. They thought they were going to be super wealthy coming to America. It was guaranteed. I think they're about to find out there's going to be a huge attack on the yellow people of America because of the frenzy that's being whipped up between China and the U.S. So here's a very quick example of what it was like in the case of Manzanar out in Lone Pine, California, in a desert area.
Back when I was an American public school student, and even when I went to college here, we had our requisite lessons on World War II.
Mussolini had to be. His people were growing restless. Fascism hadn't produced the heaven on earth that he had promised them. So he pulled the old trick of launching a foreign war to divert attention from troubles at home.
We were taught about the evils of tyrants and concentration camps and the deadly consequences of an authoritarian personality when taken to its most dangerous extremes. And how that power and the fear it generated could turn ordinary human beings subjected to it into monsters who would turn on one another, allowing abominable atrocities to happen to their fellow human beings simply by turning a blind eye to each other's suffering. But as a Midwestern girl growing up in the 80s, I don't recall ever learning about what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II. 80 years ago, right here in America, known widely throughout the world as the land of the free. That's when the US government ordered between 110,000 and 120,000 Japanese American citizens, men, women, and children, from their homes and businesses and schools to be forcibly detained in military-style camps in remote areas of the West. Based not upon crimes committed, but solely upon their ancestry. And the pretense of suspicion.
So they go into this documentary. There's lots of material on YouTube. You could look at it and bone up on it at your leisure. Now, as I mentioned before, and this is the reason for the pic I put to illustrate this talk, Elvis was the king of Las Vegas for a certain point. For a 5-year span, he was doing, I think, 2 shows a week for a while, like $100,000 back then. And I can't remember the exact figures. It's in this book here. But even Colonel Parker was astounded that the money he was being offered to his man Elvis, and I'm sure he pocketed a lot of it, cash money, right? But the point is, Elvis sold out the International Hotel every performance, and I think he still holds the records. I never saw Elvis. I wasn't interested in the 1970s version of Elvis. As I told you earlier, I was interested in the 1950s and early 60s version of Elvis. I didn't like Elvis movies. I thought they were junk. And I didn't like not all of them, but a lot of the RCA Elvis was pretty junky. He did some gospel albums that were pretty good. Right? Elvis. So here, and I took care not to make sure there was no music playing, otherwise I'd get a copyright strike. But I might have missed something. If I do, I'm going to have to stop it real quickly. But here's a backstage look at the monumental debut of Elvis Presley at the International Hotel. This is the Elvis that most people remember, his engagement at the International Hotel. It also made the International Hotel, it put it on the map. It had a vacancy rate of maybe 1%, 2%. They had, 2,000 rooms, something like that. Huge casino floor. Most of you, or many of you, have been to Las Vegas, so I won't go into the details. But this is some of the story behind it. Here is Elvis, or as we say, Elvis. Xavier Cugat, which is a figure from my parents' generation. And he's the one that brought Charro to the fore, the Cuchi Cuchi girl from España. So these are old. That's why I wasn't really following Elvis at this point, because these guys to me were of a different generation. But let's end it there. I could never understand how she made it in showbiz. Well, I do understand it. It's called mob influence. But that's Elvis. I mean, he hadn't done a concert on that scale for about 10 years. He was really, really nervous. They were wondering if he was going to be able to draw that kind of crowd. So they opened the International Hotel. Krikorian and his management team said, well, we're going to play it safe and have Barbra Streisand on. And, they sold out tickets, but the reviews were mixed. But then when they brought Elvis, like a month later, a few weeks later, man, people were lining up early. And Kurt Krikorian admits that he made a mistake by not opening with Elvis instead of Streisand. Streisand is another person I could not feel, because she's my generation, but she was doing the repertoire of my parents' generation. She had no feel for rock and roll, pop music, whatever. She was doing show tunes. So there's only 2 groups that like it. My parents, her Broadway type tunes, and gays, right? But we young people were pretty much turned off to Streisand. But nonetheless, she made tons of money because there were still a lot of people around who worshipped Barbara Streisand. So I mentioned as I close down here, the Mormon Mafia. Hopefully, you'll take away from this talk another group that's requires scrutiny, not just in Las Vegas, but in American institutions in general, including education and law enforcement and elective office. Right, here we go.
Las Vegas was built by the mafia, but few realize those formative years were also steered by a vastly different group with vastly different interests. Mormonism has deep roots in the city of Las Vegas. Mormons built the first settlements on the site and were largely responsible for creating its casino culture. Today, we're going to take a look at the untold story of how the Mormon Mafia built Las Vegas into what it is today. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know in the comments below what other cities of interest you would like to hear about. Okay, now get your feet off the table for this video. What do you think this is, a sawdust joint? He nonetheless decided to open the Bank of Las Vegas. E. Perry Thomas, a Mormon-connected financial manager employed by Continental in Utah, was sent to run the new institution. Thomas is noteworthy because he became the first banker to start lending money to the folks who would soon come to run the town with an iron fist: casino operators. Whether they were actually criminals or not, these operators had an unsavory reputation due to their connections with the traditionally organized crime-controlled area of gambling. When asked about the risks that came along with dealing with such clients, Thomas would simply respond that he was in the banking business, and regardless of what business they were in, the casino people were good loans. Thomas's decision led to a quick increase in the size and number of Las Vegas casinos. He also fought to change rules that prohibited corporate ownership of casinos, presumably because corporate borrowers were also good loans. This would also bring the casinos under the jurisdiction of the SEC, or Securities and Exchange Commission, which would effectively become overseers of the casino business. This would ensure that mobsters and organized crime types could no longer use casinos as fronts for laundering money. They say that in the 1940s and 50s, Las Vegas was run by the mafia, and that is completely true. But in the 1960s, a new player came to town: Howard Hughes. Hughes was a celebrity businessman, film producer, and aviator. He was a titan of American industry, but towards the end of his life, he was also an increasingly unwell man, prone to extremely eccentric behavior. On Thanksgiving weekend in 1966, Hughes arrived in Las Vegas by train and took up residence at the Desert Inn. He stayed there for a month, never once leaving his room. Eventually, the owner of the hotel threatened to kick Hughes out. Hughes didn't want to leave, so he bought the hotel. That's the kind of thing you can do to end an argument when you're Howard Hughes. Needless to say, he continued to stay holed up on the hotel's top floor. After that, he started buying up Las Vegas casinos left and right, snatching them right out of the hands of the mob. However, since he never left the Desert Inn, he needed a team of executive assistants and advisors to oversee his business dealings. This team was led by a man named Frank Gay, who was curiously known as Bill. Gay was a Mormon that Hughes had hired right out of UCLA. Hughes preferred working with Mormons because he knew they didn't drink, smoke, or gamble. He thought this made them more likely to avoid being tempted by the vices of Vegas and handle his business with greater discretion and integrity. Hughes was so committed to using Mormons that they wound up composing the entirety of Gay's team. The group quickly became known around town as the Mormon Mafia.
Well, that was proved to be a big mistake on the part of Howard Hughes. He was only there for 4 years, but by the end of his stay there, holed up in the Desert Inn, which he bought, he just bought it for tax purposes, and he started buying other casinos for their tax breaks, right? By the time he left there, most of his assets had been, well, maybe not most, but much of his assets had been clawed back by these Mormons, who I assume are connected to the Central Intelligence Agency, right? J. Edgar Hoover also liked Mormons because supposedly they don't drink, they don't gamble, and they don't carouse, right? Not true. And to this day, 2024, they're very powerful. in Las Vegas, but they managed to keep their names out of the paper. Utah, their power base, the state, is adjacent. It's north of Nevada. And they have the banks and they have these establishments. They also are involved with ethnic enterprise, like the Armenians were, or any other group. So that's something to look into more deeply at another time. And I'll conclude with this one clip about the recluse, the famous recluse, Howard Hughes, there's a number of books on Hughes. I encourage you to pick up any one of them or multiple ones. I've read a lot of them. And through that, you will really understand the history of post-war America and the world. Read about Howard Hughes. It's fun. It's exciting. It's movie worthy, but you can read about it in these biographies. So let's take a look at this one.
1966, a mystery man arrived in the valley aboard a special train. Reclusive billionaire Howard Hughes was an aviator, movie maker, and business tycoon.
But in the 4 years he spent living in Las Vegas, only a handful of people ever saw him face to face. Hughes left an indelible mark on our community. George Knapp looks back at that event half a century ago.
This inauspicious railroad crossing in North Las Vegas is the exact spot where Howard Hughes' excellent Nevada adventure began. The billionaire used his influence to essentially clear the tracks so his special train could travel unimpeded from Boston to Las Vegas. On Thanksgiving night, 1966, he arrived with no fanfare.
The train stops. Hughes is carted off the train on a stretcher, gets into a van. They drive the van over to the Desert Inn Hotel, to the back of the Desert Inn. They go up the fire escape. They carry, Hughes.
Veteran journalist Jeff Schumacher knows the story as well as anyone. He's the content director at the Mob Museum, which has a Hughes exhibit. And he wrote a highly regarded book about the billionaire's years in Nevada, subtitled Power, Paranoia, and Palace Intrigue.
He moves into one of the suites, and his aides are kind of blocking off the hallway, and they're operating in the rest of the top floor. Nobody in town knows that Howard Hughes is here. It takes several days for the press to figure this out. The mysterious Howard Hughes has moved to Las Vegas. What's this all about? And the speculation begins.
The timing was fortuitous for Las Vegas. The economy was sputtering, unemployment was up, gaming revenue was down. Critics were once again saying the town was overbuilt. The arrival of Hughes was seen as a very big deal. Hughes had been here before, starting in the late 40s. He flew over the desert in his many developmental planes, wooed and stashed various women in Las Vegas hotels, hired future Sheriff Ralph Lamb to be his eyes and ears, and bought an unassuming green house, which today sits behind KLAS-TV, which is something else he eventually decided to buy. Hughes' right-hand man during his 4 years in Las Vegas, Robert Mayhew, later said the billionaire had no specific business plan in mind when he arrived, that he mostly wanted a place to stay.
Okay, that is the notorious Robert Mayhew. He has one book that he wrote himself, and he's been written about extensively. Mayhew, M-A-H-E-W, and he got kicked out of the Hughes circle by the Mormon Mafia. He was a Jesuit, though. I think maybe that's the reason why. He was with Hughes from 1955 to 1970. That's a long time. But he never once met Howard Hughes in person. And Mayhew was CIA, right? Those initials keep cropping up in this particular talk, right? And again, I'm not impugning the legacy of Kirk Kerkorian, but I can't see how he was not in some way connected to British and American intelligence and Wall Street and the city of London. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that will come out in due time. I'm just throwing this out there for now. That's my contribution as a critical reader. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you back next Sunday, God willing. Thank you so much. Bye.